Welcome to Curious Coach, aha moments for coaches. This space is to document and share insights and revelations about the craft, the art, and the profession of coaching. I'm Tiffany Dedeaux, a master certified coach, certified professional resume writer, and the founder of Sacred Time. As a career coach and guide, I see myself as a light in dark places, so I may illuminate some topics for you because it's important to me that you identify and master your own coach approach. This isn't just a podcast, it's a place to walk with insight, sit with questions, and to follow the thread of what calls us into deeper knowing. On this episode of The Curious Coach, we are going to talk about what are the signs of someone being coachable? Because not everybody we talk to should be coached or should be coached by us. First off, know that for me, I think that coaching involves consent. And so I did learn that in coach training school. Sometimes I forget and I fall into coach mode and I start being curious. I mean, I once did that to a guy at a bar and he finally just looked at me. And then I realized, wow, I was just drilling deep into this thought process he was having. And I guess I could have asked him before I did that. Clearly that didn't work out. But what I would say is what inspired this conversation for me is a client telling me that they thought they failed at coaching and they've been through a lot of different rounds of coaching. And what I find interesting is anytime a client tells me something, because I get curious about what's this about? You just want to ask those questions. Maybe that's just me, but this happened, live event, and I'm talking to somebody who tells me they think they failed at coaching. And I guess this ended up at a place of what makes a person coachable, because they did start off mentioning they'll go back to coaching when they're ready or when like all these things align, not just the stars, but the moon and the planets and like 50 million things need to come together for them to think that they were ready for coaching. I was like, okay, well, that's understandable. And then I proceeded to share 3 things to help them align with whether or not they were ready for coaching, which I find fascinating from a standpoint, it all is, isn't it? From a standpoint of what makes me me, as I like to figure out decision making. That's why I focus in on career satisfaction, because I was always reading the self-help books when I was younger to figure out, why did he decide that? Or why did she do that thing? When she could have done these other things. And so I like to study decision making. I like to figure out the practical, how do I get from point A to point Z? And there's got to be a pathway, even if I decide I'm going to make up the path in the middle of it all. So that is the way that I think. And I literally said 3 things that I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to go into how this is relating to coaching. The first thing I did do was sort of calibrate it with therapy. I'm not saying that was an option. I'm not offering that up. But if you did need to know, like, how do I know who to talk to? Because I literally, in the point of this conversation, said, coaching is just a conversation. So if you could talk, you could conceivably be ready for coaching. That was very simplified and not entirely true. So I backed up and I gave more context. And I was like, it depends on the conversation you want to have. If you're going to talk about the past and what everything is rooted in, then in that case, you might be thinking of therapy. But if you want to talk about what's now and what's next, that is the coaching conversation. So I gave that context and then became clear, would never want to talk about the past. Okay, so then that is a qualifier. Okay, so we're leaning towards coaching. And so then the other thing came up, 2 more points came up, and you ever just say stuff in the moment and you're like, "Dang, that's smart, I should write that down." So I wrote it down, and this is why I'm sharing it with you because I was like, "Huh, that might be smart." So I invite you to weigh in after you listen to what all I have to say. But in this case, I said, "Hmm, you could be coachable if you're open to new things, because if you're completely closed off and nothing anybody says to you, you're gonna even entertain or think about, or you're always gonna shut it down. Nope, not gonna work, not gonna work, not gonna work. Well, that's not coaching and that's not going anywhere. Now, so that is one criteria. I said, well, if you're open to other things, you could be ready for coaching. The other thing I recognized and I said, and honestly, once you know that you might be open to other things, you could even engage coaching just to figure out what that other thing or other things could be looking like, or just even identify those other things. Because sometimes we need a pre step. That step is so large that you can't just take that step, right? You need a micro movement, a micro step. And so that is kind of the thought process that I was having when I suggested that, even if you just need to identify what might be different or could be different that you would be open to, that might even be a coaching conversation. I will tell you the story of how I came to recognize the importance of micro movements. I actually trained in eco psychology. And for me, I was studying the importance of story, again, decision making and meaning making. So it's fascinating that that all led me to coaching, right? Um, but in the middle of figuring out what eco psychology meant for me, I went the route. There were like three different tracks, and I chose the track of cultural transformation. And as part of that, I was really fascinated and devouring as many books as I could around wilderness therapy. So that explains like the first 3 or 4 books I published, right? It is the looking outside of ourselves to being a part and one with the rest of nature. We are in fact an animal, and in studying all of this and seeing how this could be applied to practicality of everyday life, I went on this voyage aboard the USS Resolution. We were working with at-risk youth, and I was, an apprentice essentially for a summer. I did wilderness quests, and then I was an apprentice on one, and then I shadowed a crew for this wilderness therapy excursion, and what was fascinating to me was there was no wind for a lot of this, and so we had to row the USS Resolution, our funky selves, going across the bay near Bellingham, Washington. Stunning in the middle of summer, but also it's like vast blue vistas of water, brown islands of land, and a big old mountain painted on the horizon called Mount Rainier. Not a mountain, a volcano, but whatever. Go with me here. And I was like, this is gonna take forever. I mean, I already had been working on blisters. I bought these like padded gloves so I could help row. And we're moving across the bay. And I discovered about myself in these moments that I love to track progress. Doesn't, right? I like to see progress. I like to track progress. Like that is important to me to feel hope. And so I look for ways to track progress. And in this case, everything looked the same. It was all browns and blues. And then I recognized, huh, you see that mountain, that volcano painted on the horizon? What if I track where I am in relationship to that thing that is not going to change? And that helps me to know that I've made progress. And so that's what I did. I proceeded to say, "Oh, we're not yet to Mount Rainier. So, okay, we got a ways to go." And then, because I never knew where we were going, only they knew, like, the direction we were headed, what island it was we would anchor at. I had not a clue. That's just how it was for me. So we're rowing, and then I was like, "Oh, man, this is hard." And then I look up and we're in the middle of the mountain. I was like, "Oh, progress. Okay." And then it's in our rearview mirror. And then it's like, so at a certain point, I consider that micro movements because if I was just staring at it, it looked like we weren't doing anything. Sometimes I had to look down at the horizon line and the island that was before, the painted looking Mount Rainier on the horizon, and I could track certain distinguishable trees or divots in the earth that I could say, "Oh, I'm before that or after that." And so that is how I started to think about micro movements and micro improvements and being able to track progress. Sometimes we can't take the whole step because it's too big, too overwhelming. And I do define overwhelm as trying to figure out the end from the beginning of your journey. And with all the twists and turns life and careers could take, that is just ridiculous that we think we could know. It's helpful to know, and that's different. And so I offered up that pre-step. What if you just identified what you might be open to? And that is the beginning of a coaching conversation. That is the story that inspired me to turn on the microphone today. And I thought, well, this is all well and good. It makes sense to figure out who's coachable because how it relates to coaching is how do I know I'm going to coach somebody? But better than that, how do I know I'm going to coach somebody who is, in fact, ready for change is what comes up in my spirit right then. They're ready for change, and how will I know it? Part of it is the fit and the flow of it all. So in that moment, they may not be ready for coaching. There are days, bad days sometimes, and that you could be coaching the same person, but that is not the day for coaching. And sometimes we feel it in ourselves as the coach. Sometimes it feels like this is not the day I should be coaching. And so the fit and flow of it all feels like part of it. There's an attunement, a synchronicity, an alignment that just fits into place like the right puzzle piece that isn't the corner square and all the things come together. There is an openness also to the conversation I might be having and the questions I might be asking. When I'm truly coaching, and I tell this in the book Master Coach, is there's that moment where it feels like a herky jerky, you can't get there, and why are we starting and stopping, and why does this feel painful as a conversation? And I had that conversation with the coach, and she admitted that the difference between that herky jerky beginning and the end where it felt like it flowed and there was so much excitement and momentum and it built up and it just gushed out, it flowed so much. I was like, "Whoa, what did you do? That was some magic." And it went from switching from "I'm gonna figure this out for you" to "I'm just gonna be curious about what you're thinking around all this stuff." And that broke open the dam of that conversation. So that is the difference between fit and flow to me. But also it makes the difference specifically if you're trying to do your recordings. It's not just coach a warm body trying to have a conversation. It is finding your right fit, coaching at your right time. And so that is the magic of the moment. And if you haven't read the Master Coach book and you haven't met me, know that for a good chunk of my last two credentials, my mentoring was done by Diana Diaz of Hawthorne Union. And one of the pivotal moments that had come up for me was recognizing that I needed to position myself for success as the coach. in order to know, in order to have that flow of conversation. And so I went from, oh, I'm giving out free coaching, trying to get this recording so I can get my MCC, to not just like trying to stuff all these free calls in my afternoon after lunch when I'm not at my best. And that's a good time for all my admin work. But I just allowed and opened up my schedule to the mornings, which is my favorite time to contemplate life and to look at possibilities, and just to not have had the day weigh in on me and my thoughts. And so just by scheduling things in the morning, by asking and getting consent to record calls on the phone versus where I'm on video and I feel extra self-conscious because I see how I move as well as how the client moves. Like, these are things I did to get the recordings. So that is for me to be able to be the coach, and the coaching presence that needs to happen to determine if somebody else is coachable or to allow someone else to be coachable. But the importance of determining what coachable means to you, what that looks and feels like for you and your coaching, means the difference between the stutter, stop, painful, not feeling good enough situation of some of these conversations and the free flowing, gliding across the water top feeling of a perfectly aligned conversation with the right words at the right moment, and it all just flows. It's like you didn't even have to try, and you're not even sure who that was, but that was the best moment ever, and you feel all powerful and right in your purpose. Like, those are the conversations. And so setting yourself up so that you can get the recordings at those times means you also do need to vet who you're talking to, because there's certain things you like to talk about or you prefer to talk about. Yes, you could talk about and coach anything. We all know that. And you don't have to know anything about what the client goes through or is an expert in order for you to be able to coach them. You just have to care enough about humanity and that person to be curious and think that they could do all things but on their own without your input because it got them here, and just be open and curious about that. And if they're open and curious enough about themselves and the world and the now of it all and what could be next, that opens up the conversation so that it doesn't just stay stagnant in the now, but it can flow to what's next. And that is being coachable. That is you being ready to coach, and that is them being coachable. At least that's how I'm thinking of it in this moment that I want to share with you. And so this is kind of where I have arrived with it in terms of being coachable. And I'm curious for you. What does being coachable look like for you? What does it feel like? How do you know a client, potential client, another person is the ideal coaching conversation partner for you? So what's next? Well, for 2026, we deem this the year of mastery. So you could join us in one of three ways, or all three if you so choose. The first way is with career coach training. This will be our way of helping you to focus on mastering your own coach approach. We'll do that through peer coaching and tips and tricks from me, Tiffany Dedeaux, a master certified coach. This program is going to be for a total of 22 CCEs. If you're in the ICF, that is more than half of what you need to renew your credential. The second way I'm going to help you is with the Career Coach Mastermind. In this monthly group session, we're going to dig into different topics. It'll be part book club, part podcast, but all about coaching, our craft, and what we're learning. The third way you can join me is with Deepen Your Roots. This is a way for you to dig deep so that you can aim high in this next year. I will be joined by Mother Nature because I will be going back to my roots with some nature-based coaching techniques. I'll be joined with Nicole Venner, the intuitive executive coach that will help you to trust yourself, and Gail Whipple, the leadership coach for creatives who are in the process of exploring what's next. Join us for a year of mastery where you can create the space to grow in community to position your brand for what's next. Your partner in change, Sacred Time.